can a big round of applause for an introduction to Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3, and what it all means with Alex from Hiro.
All right. Hi, Jonas. Hey, everybody. Glad to see everybody out here at Bitcoin Unleashed. I'm going to put my water down. For those of you I haven't met, my name's Alex Miller. As of last year, I am the CEO and now CEO of Hiro Systems, which you hopefully know if you're a builder, the dev tools company for the Stax ecosystem. Before I saw the light and came to join Web3 and build in Stax, I spent the last decade working in Web 2. I've spent 8 years at Stack Overflow, small website some of you might have used. I've spent years advising other companies and startups in the user-generated content space, and there's a lot I learned in that. I've also got a wonderful guest with me today. Elliot, come on up. Elliot Noss is the CEO of Tucows, and I think as we were talking last night and he said, skipped over Web 2 entirely. He's a Web 1 guy. Elliot, why don't you give a quick introduction for yourself?
I have been lucky enough to be around since the dawn of the internet, toiling away, I like to say, behind the counter at the internet. So we have one of the second largest domain registrar in the world, a fiber to the home business, a telecom software business. But most importantly and most relevant for here, I've been involved in the protocol wars from the very beginning, and there's just so much that's resonant from the beginning to now.
Absolutely. And fun fact, the first time I ever had to move a website off of my desktop computer running on my home cable modem and actually put it on a real web host, it was Tucows that I moved it to. So let's grab a seat. And what we're going to be talking about today is what are all the lessons from Web 1 and all the protocol wars that went through it, from all the user-generated content and community growth that we saw out of Web 2, and what are the lessons that builders in Web 3 need to take from everything that happened then and incorporate into what they're doing. So I think to kick it off, what I'd love to hear is, Elliot, why Web 3? What got you excited and wanting to build in it?
Well, so I think for a lot of us who were around at the beginning, in the very early internet, we had years of euphoria, and in some senses, this is certainly what I've dedicated my professional life to. In some senses, it has exceeded even my wildest expectations. But I think in many other senses, for myself and a lot of others, there have been profound disappointments, and a lot of the nastiness we see on the current internet is just troubling. And I think for me, Web 3 holds the promise of kind of righting a bunch of those wrongs.
All right. So what do you think is fundamentally different, I guess, about Web 3 that's going to enable it to fix those problems that we ran into with Web 2?
So I'm I like to strip it down to the primitives.
Okay.
And for me, I think of Web 1 as having built the network, Web 2 as having built the applications, and Web 3 is all about the governance layer. And if you think about the governance layer, you can think about manifestations. The two big ones for me are money and identity. Mm-hmm. And when I think about what you can do with a distributed database, there are a lot of people trying to do things that aren't really in need of a distributed database. But when you think about money, when you think about identity as two examples, boy, do you need them.
So I was actually having a conversation earlier today with some folks who are building and working in gaming, and one of the things they pointed out to me that I hadn't really thought about is so many gaming companies who are looking at this are looking at writing everything they do back to the chain, which is so unnecessary, right? The blockchain's useful for the transaction layer, for the things you need accountable and that, but 98% of what you're doing in gaming can just get written to a normal database, can be done, and then you can do the important stuff to the blockchain. You don't need to be writing everything back to it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And so I think where you get to there is I'm really seeing this chasm between the Web3 world and kind of the rest of the internet at this point. And it's because people haven't yet figured out sort of how to live on both sides. And so that's something I think a lot about.
Absolutely. So I think those are general principles that apply to building in Web3, right? This is what's powerful about blockchains and this next generation internet. Why Bitcoin and Stax then? Because you're not at an Ethereum conference right now, right? You're sitting here at Bitcoin Unleashed. What is it that attracted you to Stax and Bitcoin?
You know, I think that for me, and again, this comes from having been through the early protocol wars, I think that the future is inevitably multi-chain, and inevitably fitness for purpose. And I think that the questions that I would ask people around projects they were building, what they were doing, et cetera, so often it was this self-referential stuff. I've been looking for opportunities to kind of bridge from what's going on in Web3 to the rest of the canonical internet. And it just seems so obvious to me that when you're doing transactions, you want to settle them natively on the currency. You know, I should say underneath that, I'm a student of economics and history. I first got interested, you know, I have people who remind me that I told them to buy Bitcoin at $200, and I'm sure many people here were earlier than that. At the end of the day, I saw every single developed economy in the world, every single major currency, just copying the mercantilism of the East Asian companies or countries and printing money like crazy. And you know, the devaluation of fiat currency was inevitable to me. So I think you have those two pieces.
I don't know what you're talking about. Nothing's happened in the last couple of years that would advance that.
You didn't need the last couple of years for that to be true. And I'm interested in robust conversations on modern monetary theory, and I actually buy a lot of it. But it's still inevitably a bound global currency is obvious to me. I should say the other thing, you know, I've spent really more than 20 years now deep inside of the ICANN world, which is the one tiny sliver of governance that exists on the internet. If you have a single authoritative root, the one little kernel at the center of it all, the rest can be as decentralized as possible. And so, you know, there's been massive, you know, that's the only working example of global governance that exists today, because for a weird historical reason.
What are you talking about? The UN works great and is super effective all the time.
You know, I'm really precise about that. The UN is international, not global. UN, like many other of those institutions, are between nations. Global transcends the nation state, and you know, I like to, you know, think about post-nation state.
You know what, Elliot? It was a joke. I was making fun of the UN. You don't have to make an excellent point in which you are completely correct about the difference between international and global.
People miss it all the time.
No, you're right. You're right, though. You're entirely correct. And I mean, again, this is one of the interesting things about the internet. It is the first truly global as opposed to international structure.
And I was lucky enough, or we were lucky enough in the internet, for there have to be this historical accident where governments of the world actually gave this tiny little group of people power over this thing. You know, if we could do that with things like fisheries or taxation or, of course, you know, the environment, there would be much greater chance of succeeding.
Oh, and I mean this seriously. Thank God they did not realize the potential of it, right? So many governments completely missed how fundamental and transformative the internet would be. And you actually see the inverse of this with like a number of them who clearly realize how deeply threatening crypto is to them today. And they see it from the financial and the monetary, I mean, going back to the printing and fiat currency, they see it from the financial and the monetary policy side. They miss it from the, oh God, what if people create like an internet that we can't just block in the same way that we do now?
So I have to at this point confess that I'm a Canadian. So what I say next
we still
is,
like you
know, through a subjective lens, but I really only think it threatens primarily the very largest countries. It threatens certainly China. It threatens US domination. But for most countries in the world, it actually provides them a nice, neat alternative. So we'll see how that plays out. I mean, I think that I'm going to be fascinated to watch the rest of the week, and for the political and historical discussions.
I was going to say we're not going to go down this total tangent, but the discussion of the costs and benefits of like reduced U.S. soft power via dollar denomination is an entire study. It's going to be an entire field of history study. But we're going to go back. We're going to talk about the lessons from Web 1 and Web 2, because that's what we promised and advertised. So obviously governance is a big area that I'm going to call you an expert in, because I think especially compared to most people, you've got to be one of the most informed people on global technical governance. What's one of the lessons, or what's something that you think folks who are starting to build, and we were talking about this yesterday, you and I are both of you, we're in like 1991, 92, we are so early in this next generation internet. So what do you want people to take away from what has happened over the last 30 years there as they're going into building Web 3?
You talked about early, and again, I'm just looking as an outsider. I am not deep in this space. I'm here to learn this week. But I'm lucky enough to get exposed to a bunch of very successful Web3 companies and talk with the CEOs, talk with the investors, et cetera. And it is still clear to me that nobody has come close to building anything that is of broad commercial application. So, I mean, we're in the top of the first inning. That is true about everything that's gone on with smart contracts. That's true in terms of everything that's gone on with DAOs and governance. I mean, we are in a situation where I've heard multiple times now, kind of way back in April of 2021, it's so I really think number one, boy, is this early, and it's going to be all about getting, sort of broader human adoption. The second thing is, and this is fundamental, sometimes I'll see people, quoting the original white paper almost like a biblical text. It was a document, brilliant document, created in a context. And that context was around money. The governance of every chain, and again, I said I clearly see a multi-chain future, is going to be unique to its facts. And sort of underneath that, I talked right at the very beginning about how a lot of us in Web 1 have been profoundly disappointed and even feel guilty about the current internet in a lot of respects. But what all of us deeply understand is that protocols are our governance, our philosophy, and the absence of things in protocols are also policy decisions. And so often, I'll give you the best example of that for me. In the DNS, which is this amazingly successful protocol, I mean, we have massive global adoption. If countries wanted to take back the internet, which they threaten at the ITU election every 4 years, they couldn't do it. Right. I describe it as, you will pry my name server out of my cold dead fingers. Although that joke is probably too old.
We get it, don't worry.
And the absence of security in the routing protocol, which is what the DNS is, was a policy choice. So that doesn't mean that there should be no security protection at the application layer, which sits above the network. It just means that shouldn't sit at the routing layer. Similarly, those base Web3 protocols, we should look at the absence of doing something as being a statement. Sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it's not, but it should not be taken as religion.
So this came up and still comes up all the time in the Web 2 world of what is the proper point to do content moderation at? Right? Also, just in terms of people knowing they made mistakes, I don't know if everyone caught it, but yesterday or the day before, Jack Dorsey tweeted basically his regrets of some of the things that had developed in Web 2 and his role in doing them. So there's, through the generations, acknowledgement of this.
Yes.
But this is one of the interesting things to me is like, I'm both a hardcore like free speech absolutist and neutrality absolutist at the protocol level, and an ardent moderationist, if that's a word, I don't know, I'm making it up if it's not, at the application level.
Well,
nobody wants unmoderated applications.
I just think there's a hypocrisy about that people don't realize. I think, how many people here use Gmail, right? And well, 99% of your email is censored, and that's just called spam filtering.
Yep.
One of the things that we do as a domain registrar, people talk about, there should never be removal of domain names at the registrar level. Well, we take down obvious phishing domain names all the time. You have something where a bank has a, kind of a one letter or an umlaut or a, and it's used in a phish, we'll take that down. And that is a positive. Now, there has to be standards. There has to be, I look at something like spam filtering. There's terrible governance around it.
Yeah.
And that's because people can't rise up above and call it what it is. So I just think that there's a hypocrisy around, people calling themselves, particularly in Web3 protocols, freedom of speech absolutists, and sort of the way that they live in the world.
Yep. You also see this actually come up every time there's laws or regulations at a national level proposed around it. It's not possible to write a law that actually addresses this, right? Because it's like, if you do this thing that adversely impacts a company's business, it's like spamming is a business. So you'd be knocking out a lot of this stuff. And so do you think, what do you think the best way for people to be able to have these conversations is?
Yeah, so I think first is to really be careful when you are putting something forth as a religious tenet, as opposed to looking at it in a context. When I say we're top of the first inning, well, that means that governance layer is TBD. The right way to approach, anybody who looks at Web3 and says, well, this is the way it's always been, so this is the way it need be, is immediately frozen themselves in amber, and they're kind of disqualified from the future almost, because they just won't play along as it changes. And I saw this so much in Web 1 where there were absolutists. But the other thing, again, is to really hew to context.
Yeah.
I think people don't think enough about what is the purpose of a chain, what is the specific purpose of a chain. I could do 20 minutes, an hour on that.
Yeah. Well, so this comes up all the time, and you see people say this, which is, you can't get enamored with the technology. And I saw this happen all the time with people. They get so enamored with the technology that they lose sight of the problem they're actually trying to solve. And to your point about context, it's all about the context. It's all about getting the end result, because the general rule is consumers could not care less about the technology that you're using to solve their problem. All they care about is, did you solve their problem?
You bring up what evokes for me great Web 1, Web 3 examples. I mean, people will not, to disabuse anybody of any notions, and maybe this makes people sad, maybe it doesn't. People will not do hard storage at scale. Will not. People will not run their own nodes at scale. These are the Web 1 equivalents of everybody's going to run their own mail server. Isn't that fantastic? Yeah. Everybody's going to run their own web server. Isn't that fantastic? Which were legitimately things people said, mostly geeks like me, in 94, 5, 6. Those things just will not happen. So you do end up, for better or worse, with the need for trusted intermediaries.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes, who should they be? Now for me, again, I think that's going to, the last sort of a likely person there is, the nation state and kind of existing governance. But I do want to make sure I note, you talked before about where do you regulate these things. What we are seeing, and this is, I'm going to synthesize kind of a Yuval Harari point, what we are seeing is people trying to solve global problems in national frames. And it's impossible.
Yeah, never going to happen.
You cannot solve a global problem
Oh my God.
using national frames.
Oh, don't even get me started on people trying to make determinations about culturally appropriate content moderation.
Yeah.
When you're in one country, different cultures, different countries have completely different. And so earlier someone was talking about product development, early stage product development for companies, right? And focusing on a really narrow problem. I want to say it was Trevor, it might have been someone else. And he was saying you got to focus on a really narrow problem. And to your example of like everyone, people are like, everyone's going to run their own file server, right? I'm a nerd. I love messing with stuff. My wife is probably not thrilled about the amount of like robots I let control things on our house because they're gonna rise up and kill us. And I'm like, I know, but I don't want to have to get out of bed to turn off the lights, so I'm willing to take the trade-off. But among other things, I have a Synology at home for doing certain file storage. But first off, notice I run a Synology. I run a nice abstracted layer that runs it easily, and I only store massive content on there, like media. All of my files and documents, stuff I might need rapid access to, I use a trusted third party for because it then syncs to my phone. It's in a lot of different places, right? The same theoretical idea of where do I store my files based on the more subtle context of when do I need them, how do I need them, what am I trying to solve, completely differentiates the trade-offs I'm willing to take between security and privacy, usability, accessibility.
See, I'm simpler than that. I know if I put my crypto on hard storage, I would lose a lot of money eventually. There's no amount of keeping it in two places, and
I've got some good people I can put you in touch with. We'll get you very securely set up.
You cannot obviate my irresponsibility.
If you want,
impossible.
I can hold on to your backup keys for you, and I promise to treat them.
And that's exactly where we get to.
Wait. Are you telling me custody providers might be a thing? Yeah. Because people don't want to actually always hold all their own keys?
I think that it goes deeper than that, because I think that here, and this is where I'm particularly interested in everything on DAOs through the end of the week. I think we are moving to a world of microservices, and when I say that, microservices in the way we live. I think that'll be true around food, around transportation, around housing, around energy. And when I say that, this really neat blend of governments, non-governmental institutions, individuals, and in all of that, there are no governance frames. I mean, I hate to say this, but existing consensus mechanisms look kind of like toys to me. And when I say that, I get it, I understand it, but there's a real tension between kind of hewing to traditional web, I'm going to call them traditional, you can call anything Web3 traditional Web3 approaches, and what needs to be done going forward. So, I just think it's all to be written. The future is to be written.
Definitely. The other thing I wanted to make sure we talk about was, and this is sort of related to governance, but it's very distinct, and that's incentive structures, right? Because I think you probably played a lot with that. I know I did. Again, all of Web2 and UGC is all about incentives. So I'm curious, anything that, again, same question, what have you seen from your time that you think is important when people are thinking about incentive structures?
I think, what I've experienced sort of painfully is all the stuff that didn't work. And when I say, I'm going to fund, so we all know, we live in this terrible surveillance economy, and the terrible experience with our privacy and our data. For me, what Web3, this might be the single thing that most excites me, is the opportunity to flip the triangle and put users in control. Now, the trick is getting from where we are today to where we need to be. And so when you talk about incentives, I think contextual incentives in chains that are solving problems can be funded by suppliers for the benefit of humans, and all you need is a funding mechanism that gets you to what I would call escape velocity.
Yep.
So I will tell you again, more reasons to maybe throw fruit at me. I hate both proof of work and proof of stake. I don't think.
Yeah, but proof of transfer is genius, right?
I don't understand it well enough, and I have no idea.
Okay.
But I think that there are so many contexts where the incentives can be inside the problems the system solves.
Yep.
And just pay for itself, where you have suppliers who are funding it by saving money, and then humans who are using it and just getting huge benefits. And so, I could tell you stories there that are just imaginary things in my mind right now, but
so this
boy,
is why to
I'm
me,
excited
this is why to me actually City Coins is possibly the most innovative project in all of crypto, because it's doing exactly that. The people who are using it potentially and the citizens of the city don't interact with it at all. It's the outside financial activity going on that generates all of the value and money for them. And this is one thing that I try and talk to people about. It's like, I have absolutely seen this idea among certain people in crypto that, cool, we're just going to take this thing we used to do, add the financialization of crypto and make you a stakeholder who can earn money from it, and that will make everyone love it and use it and fix all the problems. And these people have never read a single study on extrinsic versus intrinsic motivations, and realizing that actually there's a lot of human activities, for instance, the entire creation of all of Wikipedia and all of Stack Overflow and every other user-driven site, where if you had introduced direct financial incentives into that, it never would have happened. Because people are willing to do 100 times more work for free if they feel like they're contributing to something than if they are doing an economic calculation of how many dollars per hour am I getting paid.
I lived through the birth of open source software. And
there you go.
When it wasn't, it was not thought of as a viable thing. And that's, the incentives were so much more intrinsic than extrinsic, and you're exactly right. I feel like I can take most situations. I'm just chatting with a guy at lunch, and he says, "Oh, I'm in the micromobility, like scooters and bikes, and it's like, yeah. So imagine a system with a city coin where you have the suppliers there." Funding, along with probably local endowments, along with the city who all want to increase that usage, funded a lot, and the primary source of funding is a congestion tax. And that congestion tax is what provides now a benefit that either makes that micromobility free to end users or significantly subsidized. And so it's just, you can do this in almost every context. As long as the problem the chain is solving has some intrinsic value, and almost all of them do.
Yeah, absolutely. And as long as you also remember, going back to what we were talking about earlier, the technology layer itself is not going to solve this problem. Because to get that program, to get all the parties bought in, requires old school governance and old school consensus building with people. And again, you see this with DAOs. People are like, DAO's a magical layer. And it's like, no, the hard part isn't the tech. The hard part is aligning it. And this is why I think 10 and 20 person DAOs are actually more interesting than 10,000 person DAOs. Because 10,000 person DAOs, you still have to solve that huge fundamental thing of how you get 10,000 people to agree on a thing.
Yeah, so I think of governance structures where you don't necessarily have to get them to agree. What's amazing to me is people have not sufficiently connected a concept like liquid democracy to DAOs yet. I haven't, and again, anybody who's interested in that space, kind of come chat with me, because there's so much to learn, both from previous governance lessons around ICANN, and what people are doing now, and it's no magic. Lawyers say to me, "What's a DAO?" And I say, it's just the governance rules for a smart contract.
See, my lawyers say it's a securities law violation in a box. Okay, so before before we get the orchestra music,
Yes.
final takeaway for people. If there's one thing that you want people walking away with today or really sticking with them, what is it?
Just really reevaluate what's religious versus substantive in your fundamental views of Web3. You know, don't be tethered to religion. And I think, you know, as long as you're all so early that everybody's going to do great, just putting their heads down and building, as long as you don't get stuck on, you know, kind of first principles. And remember that you got to do this for human beings.
Yep.
Because they are, you know, kind of sadly not yet here.
You know, that's something I heard with Web 2 a lot that I think we didn't always internalize, but remember the human.
Yeah.
Elliot, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure to talk with you today.
It was great.